What's up, guys? I'm Justin Burkles and thank you for watching. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than anything that I've done before. I have done some book reviews, just videos and posts that are about a single book and my thoughts and a review of that book. But today I'm putting together a very intentional list of 5 books that I recommend to any beginner mystic, magus, or witch, or anyone who's just interested in embarking upon a spiritual path. So these books will span from ancient religious and spiritual traditions to very modern scientific wisdom, and it will show how together we can weave those two together to create a profoundly new and exciting and effective version of spirituality that just hasn't even been available to anyone in the past. So this is really exciting and I can't wait to get into it. But before I get started, if you like this kind of content, if you want to support my efforts to create valuable and informative and uplifting content like this, please just consider supporting me on Patreon. I have it set up where for as little as $5 a month, you can help support me, upgrade my equipment, get more people in for interviews, buy more books, all that kind of stuff, and just create better content for y'all. So if you appreciate what I'm doing, please consider that. All right, so let's get into it. These are the 5 books that I recommend for any beginner mystic. Now, why do I recommend this? So, interest in mysticism, witchcraft, magic, and contemplative practices in general has really skyrocketed in recent years. As the area of scientism and material reductionism comes to a close, humanity has found that perspective lacking and is looking for a new perspective which for the first time in history will integrate both the scientific and spiritual into a coherent worldview. A task once thought impossible, but that is no longer the case. Due to recent research on meditation, psychedelics, and religious experiences, the fields of science and religion have been in fruitful communication with each other, and each has provided insights which benefit the other. So we have proof, at least at the academic level, that there can be a meaningful integration of the two. Now, I must stress this next point because I think it is of utmost importance. It is a fatal mistake to attempt to revert to a pre-scientific worldview or spirituality. Okay? I say it is fatal because any such attempt is doomed to fail. Unfortunately, these attempts are incredibly common. Here I'm referring to both religious fundamentalism and modern pagan reconstructivism. Many who are turning towards mysticism, witchcraft, and modern paganism understandably are put off by both religious traditions and modern industrial scientific secularism. I really do understand that. Both were systems of meaning-making which were sufficient for a time, a specific time and a specific people, but are no longer viable. So people are in search of a new system of meaning-making, and a lot of these people are attempting to reconstruct pre-Christian, pre-industrialization perspectives because those perspectives worked for people in the past. And it seems that some parts of those perspectives might be potential solutions to urgent crises that we are facing today. Unfortunately, they are just not viable for us. Today, we are burdened with knowledge that was unavailable to those ancient people. We've eaten from the tree of scientific knowledge and have been cast out of the garden in which they dwelled. There is no going back. And that's a good thing. Our goal should never be to regress. Nostalgia warps our view of the past to make it seem better than it was. But that doesn't mean that everything from that time should be forgotten and left behind either. That was precisely the mistake that we made when mankind ditched religion for science, when science was new and shiny and promised to solve all of our problems, which it didn't. we threw the baby out with the bathwater. And this is how the cultural rhythm has kind of operated for all of human history. We swing from one pole to the other. But right now, we are poised at a particularly auspicious moment. We can step back and view human history from a more expansive perspective than has ever been possible before. We can become aware of the patterns which captured our ancestors and break free of them. We can recognize the insights from both religion and science and integrate them into a worldview which is more expansive, more inclusive, more rational, and more loving than anything that was ever available to previous generations. The creation and indwelling of this modern, rational, but mystical worldview should be the goal of the modern mystic or witch, rather than the futile attempt at regression. Therefore, when considering which books to recommend to a beginner on this path, I've carefully chosen those which present a mature and integral perspective. It is inevitable that each book will lean more to one side than the other, religion or science, but taken as a whole, these 5 books present profound insights and meaning-making tools from both sides. And together they should provide the reader with the philosophical and scientific insights necessary to cultivate a rational mystical worldview and the practices necessary to continue to evolve, expand, and indwell that worldview. What this should provide those who do the work is a radical transformation of the way they view the world, the way they relate to it, clarity on what their own unique contribution can be, and inspiration to manifest that. All of which works to provide them with a profound sense of meaning, something which is greatly lacking in the world today. I must warn you, however, that the middle road is not an easy path. There will be those still desperately clinging to one extreme or the other who will entice you with promises of ease, certainty, and belonging. And this call is so enticing because what they are offering is very real. However, it's misleading. The ease offered appeals to our instinct to preserve energy and avoid difficulty, but it is precisely and only in overcoming difficulty that we gain strength. The certainty offered is false and based on ignorance and will eventually be shattered, leading to existential crisis. And the belonging offered is narrow, exclusive, and devices. It severs more connections than it creates. Keep this in mind and persevere. This path is not for the faint of heart. There will be many trials and obstacles to overcome, both within and without. These books, however, will point you to many of the obstacles others have faced while walking this path before you, so you might be better prepared when they arrive. The obstacles you will face are not an indication that you're on the wrong path. The opposite is actually true. Ease is a very alluring demon which will lead to stagnation, fragility, and weakness, whereas overcoming obstacles leads to growth, strength, resilience, and confidence. With that out of the way, let's get to the good stuff, what you're really here for. Okay, so I obviously have quite a few books here, and I have a ton of books on spiritual practices, philosophy, and spirituality. So I really had to dig through my collection here to put together what I thought were the 5 best for absolute beginners. Okay, so that doesn't mean that you have to be an absolute beginner to read any of these books. They are some of my favorite ever. Here, look at them. Let's show you the 5 I'm talking about here, which you'll see in a picture I'll upload with the video in the post here as well. But I really did want to make sure that these books were accessible to people, that they weren't too old or difficult to read. I don't want people to get discouraged by philosophical or technical language that they might not understand. So I have specifically left out some books which most people would include on a list like this. Those being books such as The Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley, which I have right here. Um, and it's a wonderful book. I think it's indispensable. However, Huxley isn't necessarily the easiest person to read, and it is very philosophical, and it's a little bit more difficult and older than some of the books that I'm recommending. So I've left that one off this list. Very similarly, I have left off William James' book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is also foundational to this field and is probably the most referred to book out of any of the ones that I own on spirituality. But once again, it was written over 100 years ago, I believe. It's a little bit more difficult, a little bit more technical. So I have left those kinds of books off of this list, okay? For the very reason that, like I said, they're not as accessible as the ones that I'll be covering today. The books that I have included are not in any kind of particular order. It's not a ranked list. It's just a set of books which I think together form what you would need to kind of build the foundation for a spiritual practice. Okay, so they're going to cover practices, mindsets, philosophy, rituals, science, everything you really need to know of the who, what, where, when, why to do spiritual practices. All right, so for the very first book on my list, talk about Science and Spiritual Practices by Rupert Sheldrake. Okay, this is a more recent book once again, and Rupert is a trained scientist, and so the book is written very much from a scientific point of view, but he's also a very deeply spiritual person, and he talks about what kind of light science can shed on spiritual practices and why they have the benefits that they have been observed to have. And then he also gives specific instructions for actual spiritual practices. So the way the book is structured, at the end of each chapter, he gives a couple of practices. So I don't know if you can see down in the bottom there, it says 2 meditative practices. And he provides a meditation and then another kind of contemplative practice. And that's how the book goes. Each chapter discusses the science around a specific type of spiritual practice, and then he provides specific examples of that practice. What this book does really well is it answers the question of why. Why do spiritual practices? And he shows very rational, evidence-driven arguments for why do these different kinds of spiritual practices like prayer, pilgrimage, etc. Awesome way to start out the journey. The second book on my list is this one here, The One-Year Manual by Dr. Israel Regardie. And I just did a video and a review of this one a couple weeks ago, so go check that out if you want some more information on this. But essentially, it's a very slim book. It's exactly 70 pages. And this is just practices. Okay, so it doesn't have any of the science or philosophy or anything like that. He specifically leaves all of that out. If you want to know Israel Regardie's philosophy, he has many other books, most of which are much bigger, much more in-depth on that side of things. And they're excellent. I love his other books. But this one in particular is my absolute favorite because it contains 13 specific practices which I have found to be indispensable in my own spiritual journey. And I have adapted many of these into my own system of mysticism, of esoteric Franciscan Christian mysticism, which you can find on my blog or YouTube channel elsewhere. So really a lot of my practices are specifically based around what he teaches in this book, and I've just adapted them to fit into my own worldview and philosophy. So indispensable when it comes to the actual meditative, contemplative, and ritual practices on a spiritual path. everything you need as far as that goes, as far as I'm concerned, can be found here. And once again, go check out my review for more on that one. Now, this next book might turn some heads from my typical audience here, and this one is Psychic Witch by Matt Oren, a metaphysical guide to meditation, magic, and manifestation. Now, this book really caused a lot of waves when it came out a couple of years ago. It received several awards, and I kept hearing accolades about it from person after person, and so I decided to pick up a copy. I had a few books on witchcraft and those kinds of ritual magic, etc., and I had enjoyed some of the books that I had picked up and learned about it and experimented a little bit, so nothing in here was entirely new to me. However, I think it was written in a way that is extremely accessible, very illuminating, and very practical. He has 93, I believe, different practices and exercises. Yes, 93 in this book, where he tells you do this practice to gain this specific insight or skill or for this intention, etc. And I found many of them, I haven't tried all 93, but all of the ones that I tried were very effective and powerful for a wide variety of purposes. Most of this deals with the mental aspect of mysticism, magic, witchcraft, ritual, etc. So he talks about some of the outer aspects, the implements, the tools, the temple design, the garments, etc. But the focus is on the mental aspect, and that's why I think it's called Psychic Witch. It's on developing intuition and developing focus and visualization and energy work. All of the stuff that's really going to give power and potency to any practice you do. Because if your exterior acts and your interior experience are not aligned and cohesive, you're just waving your hands around and mumbling nonsense. Okay, so your practice doesn't have any actual potency unless the interior experience is aligned with the exterior acts that you're doing. And that's what this book is so good at teaching, is the inner part of all the rituals and practices. And he gives very specific exercises and practices to develop those kind of mental and internal skills. So I am not someone who's into the whole psychic thing. I'm not into reading the future or attempting to predict the future or anything like that. Or I don't even care about attempting to develop psychic abilities or whatever. I know some people are really interested in that, and that's fine. For them, I wouldn't discourage them from pursuing that. But I'm not interested in any of those things, and that is definitely the focus of the book and the kind of people it's written for. I still found it to be really, really powerful and helpful and effective and illuminating, even though I may not be the perfect audience for the book. I highly recommend it to anyone interested in any of this at all. Meditation, magic, whatever. If you have any interest in that, check this book out. It's worth it. And moving down my list to one that's hopefully a little less controversial, A Path with Heart from Jack Kornfield. Now, if you're not familiar with Jack Kornfield, he is a trained Buddhist monk and meditator and meditation teacher, and he is also a licensed psychologist as well here in the United States, and he has been teaching meditation for decades. So he's been at this a very long time, and he's one of the most mature meditation teachers around today. And because of that, he's able to distill all of that wisdom he's gained. He's able to talk about all the obstacles he's had to overcome, both on a personal level and at the level of a leader, kind of building spiritual communities and teaching meditation to people. And this book goes through the entire kind of spiritual path from beginning to supposed end, if there is an end, I guess. And he talks about, he says, a guide through the perils and promises of spiritual life. And that's really what this is good for, is giving you a glimpse of what you might expect as you pursue meditation and spirituality, how to not get distracted, by whatever comes up, whatever either pleasant or disturbing experiences you might have, how to integrate those, and how to keep progressing and moving forward and not getting stuck at the level of a certain vision or experience, which is a very valuable lesson. The way I think about this book is Jack Kornfield is like our modern day elder in this space of meditation and spirituality, and his book here is our guide rails to keep us from going too far off the path as we progress down it. So he's a very mature and, like I said, like an elder perspective that can really help us when we run into questions and we're not sure how to integrate a certain experience or what to do next. You can really find some really powerful guidance in this book. And once again, like pretty much all of the other books that I'm recommending in this list, he gives very practical meditations and practices and exercises you can do to realize and embody his teachings. It's not just telling you stuff like, here's my words, believe what I say. All of these books tell you, here's what I'm telling you, but here's a practice, realize it for yourself. Okay? So that's A Path with Heart. I haven't reviewed this one yet, but it's coming soon. And last but not least, I have Recapture the Rapture by Jamie Wheal. Now, this is one of my absolute favorite books of all time. Since I picked it up a couple of years ago, I've read through it twice already and have referred back to it many times. I reference it quite a few times on my blog and in other videos, and it's been absolutely foundational to how I've designed my practices and habits and rituals in my own system of mysticism that I've created. And it's really opened my eyes to the potential and possibility of our physiology to propel us to spiritual heights. Really, this one, once again, is going to be more on the side of the science of spirituality than on the spiritual traditions. It's going to be more similar to science and spiritual practices that I mentioned earlier. Both of those books are kind of a conversation between science and spirituality, and this one really takes it even a step further. He provides philosophical and historical background to describe how we've gotten to this place in modernity where we have this collapse of meaning and a meaning crisis, as some people have called it. He details how we got there and how we might navigate our way out. And then he gives you a whole wide variety of knowledge and practices and information so that you can really build your own kind of spiritual practice. He calls it the Alchemist's Cookbook, the second part of the book. And so it really is like a bunch of techniques and ingredients and tools for an alchemist to combine in interesting ways to create really powerful spiritual experiences. And those are meant to catalyze ecstasis, catharsis, and communitas. So ecstasis are ecstatic practices that bring us out of ourselves and into a blissful state. Catharsis is the release of trauma and other emotions that have been pent up in the body, and we let those out. And then communitas is the building of a real community. And so the third part of this book talks specifically about how to build spiritual communities and avoid all of the pitfalls and ways that those communities have typically gotten derailed in the past. Because there's been so many, amazing spiritual teachers that have come to America or to the West, and they start building a spiritual community and then things go downhill very quickly. There have been so many examples of this in the last 100 years that now we can take a look at all of those examples and see where they went wrong and how we can avoid that if we want to build our own spiritual communities. So All three parts of this book are very important. Recapture the Rapture by Jamie Wheel. And once again, I do have a review of this one up on my blog and on the YouTube as well if you want more information. All right, well, thank you for staying with me. Once again, these here are the 5 books that I recommend for any beginner mystic or anyone embarking down a spiritual path or looking to deepen their spirituality. I think anyone and everyone can benefit from reading them and incorporating the wisdom and knowledge that they present. Obviously, there are a million books that I could have chosen for this, so books that I've left out, that doesn't mean that they're not important or that they're necessarily worse than these. These are my favorites, and like I said, I specifically chose books that I feel are very accessible so that anyone can pick them up, read them, enjoy them, learn from them, and grow from the experience. So I hope you really enjoyed that. If you liked the video, please hit the like button for me. Consider subscribing. That really helps me out. I'm trying to grow my presence here. And once again, thank you for joining me. And a huge shout out to my current patrons who are supporting me. My efforts, your support is always greatly appreciated. If anyone else wants to pitch in, I have a link to my Patreon below. Have a good day.